brought to you by Molecule. Okay, so about 3 months ago, just before Apple's March 2019 event, I put together a list of YouTubers, bloggers, podcasters, journalists, analysts who were worth following for their takes on the show. I did it because after having been a blogger and a podcaster and now trying to be a YouTuber, I realized most of us don't know each other well, if at all, and I really wanted to try and change that. Now, just a week away from Apple's 30th annual Worldwide Developer Conference, WWDC 2019, I'm updating and expanding that list. But instead of just repeating them all here, I'm going to link to that video, that first video, in the description and highlight a few specific to WWDC so you can get your baseline follow-on. Then, because this is Apple's big software event, I'm going to add a few new sections and a bunch of new names, including some of the more public-facing Apple folks, as well as the developers, designers, and members of the industry and media that always provide me with extra insight at and around WWDC. Hit subscribe, Jedi mind trick that bell gizmo so you don't miss any of the show coverage coming your way, and then let's do this. I'm Rene Ritchie, and this is Vector. This being YouTube, you probably already know all the big YouTubers covering Apple's big show, especially the more popular ones who've been there live in recent years, like iJustine, Jenna Ezerick, MKBHD, Jonathan Morrison, Your Average Consumer, Sarah Dietschy, and Daily Tech. And you can check out the previous video for a bunch more. But there's one additional name worth watching specifically for WWDC, and that's Matthew Panzarino, who used to work on the Workflow, now Shortcuts team, but has since gone indie and makes really in-depth videos on how all of it works and how you can make it all work better for you. With new Siri Intents and Shortcuts for Mac expected this year, I can't wait to see all the automation awesomeness he shows. You also probably know most of the major Apple people already, especially executives. Tim Cook, Phil Schiller, Eddie Q. But there are some others that are definitely worth keeping an eye on as well. I'm not going to include any personal accounts here because Apple employees tend to be as privacy-centric as the company that they work for. But if you dig around a bit, you're bound to come across some of the more vocal ones. Lisa Jackson, Vice President of Environment, Policy, and Social Initiatives, is much more active, especially on the topics of environmental responsibility and accessibility. Deirdre O'Brien, who used to run People, basically HR at Apple, but a longtime operations executive, she's recently taken on Senior Vice President of Retail as well, and joined Instagram. The retail team staffs WWDC, handling pretty much everything that needs to be handled. They're the unsung heroes of the event, and they make it all happen. So, hopefully, through her, we'll get to see more of the magic they work every year. Colleen Novielli, she works on Apple's Mac product marketing team, more specifically and recently, the iMac. She's brand new to Twitter and hasn't posted much yet, but as we get into event season, that could change. John Galenzi runs technology evangelism at Apple, the team that helps put together all the talks and works with all the speakers. He doesn't tweet much, if at all, anymore, but some of the members of his team will tweet out some of the more important talks during the show. Mike Stern and Lauren Strello are design evangelists. John Tidsbury is media evangelist. And, though I think the org is a little different, Jonathan Davis is web technologies evangelist. Check them out, and through them, you can find a bunch of others. WebKit isn't a person, of course, but Apple's open source project behind the Safari browser. Based on KHTML, it's since been forked into Google's Chromium, which is now also going into Microsoft's Edge. They post a ton of details on new web features and technologies. And if you're really interested, you can dig through and also find a lot of the engineers working on it. There are a bunch of other people from other teams, including events that handles all the logistics, WWDR, the Worldwide Developer Relations Group that handles a lot of the coordination, App Store managers and editors, all the engineers and designers who work the talks and labs, PR that coordinates with the media, and again, the amazing retail team that staffs the whole thing. If you look around carefully, and especially if you follow the hashtags, you can find some of them sharing photos and stories that mean a lot to them as well. There are going to be a whole lot of Apple bloggers at WWDC this year. A lot of the ones you expect, like John Gruber, Jim Dalrymple, Jason Snell, Joanna Stern, Lory Gil, Shara Tibkin, Mark Gurman, Ina Fried, Matthew Panzarino, Dieter Bohn, and the list goes on and on and on from all around the world. Given WWDC's focus though, there are a few others worth paying special attention to. Guy Rambo co-hosts the Stack Trace podcast and writes for 9 to 5 Mac. Not only does he share a ton of information before the show, he digs deep right after the show as well. Also, check out his podcast partner, John Sundell, who set up a special blog just for DubDub. Lory Gil, who works with me on iMore, is going to her first ever WWDC. I've had the chance to listen in on some of the coverage she's planning, which is just about everything on everything, but with a special focus on developers and the women of WWDC. Michael Tsai just blogs different. Instead of a lot of his own hot takes, he compiles a ton of hot takes from other developers and outlets. Sometimes it's the best of crowdthink, others the worst of mob mentality, but it always gives you a real sense of how a topic is being covered in the media and on social. Sort of like what Philip Elmer DeWitt does with financial coverage, but on Hulk serum. Caitlin McGarry was at Macworld and is now at Tom's Guide, but regardless of where she's writing, she brings a ton of experience and savvy to everything Apple. Steve Aquino covers Apple in general, with a special focus on accessibility. He writes for TechCrunch, iMore, and his own blog. And just when most people think they know what assistive technologies are and how and where they're used and help, Steven shows you just how much deeper they go and still need to go. Federico Vitici is great all year round, but he particularly shines at WWDC, where he just begins the deep dives that he posts each year, every year, on iOS in general and the iPad in specific. Stephen Hackett, who the moment a new Mac Pro is announced, if one is announced, will no doubt have the complete history of the machine going back to, 1812. Prove me wrong. Again, I avoid financial analysts like the plague. Their clients aren't us. We're just the people they use to manipulate markets for their clients. Industry analysts, though, can be and are pure gold. I covered them all in the last video, but for WWDC, it's worth keeping an extra eye out for Carolina Milanesi and Ben Beharin, Neil Cybart, and Ben Thompson. For some people, Twitter is, for all intents and purposes, their blog. Instead of writing out long stories on their own sites, they tweet out in a bunch of very short, very insightful bites. Steve Troughton-Smith has often been called the most knowledgeable person about Apple's frameworks who's never worked at Apple. And it shows. He finds all the things and casts all the spotlights on all the issues. And, just an FYI, he also makes an amazing app for people with autism called Grace. Christina Warren might work for Microsoft these days, but she's covered Apple most of her life at some of the biggest outlets, and so now she shares all of her analysis all the time on Twitter. Ish Shabazz is just a staple of the community, attending every show I can think of, speaking at almost all of them, and sharing smart stuff on and around WWDC every damn year. Craig Hockenberry was coding for iPhone before there was an SDK. He dreamt up Twitterific in the shower and still shares a chock ton of insight on Twitter every show. Jessie Char was once the fastest iPhone typist at Apple. These days she runs Layers, the design-centric counterpoint to WWDC, held the same week so that people can get as much out of the pixels as they do the bits. Mark Edwards is a designer's designer. The depth of knowledge he has about everything from color space to implementation of icons is matched only by how generous he is with sharing it. Come for the speed renders, stay for the in-depth tutorials. Chris Latner founded and ran so many of the open source and Apple development technologies, from the LLVM compiler to the Swift language. He may no longer be at Apple, but he's still sharing a lot about all of those projects. Sebastian DeWitt probably designed your favorite or least favorite stitched leather iOS app back in the day, but these days he's working on Halide, and he and his partner Ben Sandusky just love to tear through all the new imaging stuff every year, from manual modes to Depthy API and more. Gene McDonald founded App Camp for Girls, and along with the likes of Kelly Guimont and an amazing team of workers and supporters, helps make sure the future WWDCs are only going to get even better. My list of podcasters hasn't changed from the last video, so be sure to check that out. Some of them are even live from WWDC, including The Talk Show with John Gruber, ATP with Marco Arment, Casey Liss, and John Siracusa, and there'll be a special party for Relay FM, the network with so many so great Apple shows, from Connected to Rocket, Upgrade to Download, Clockwise, and the list, I don't think it ever ends. Anyway, they'll be celebrating their 5th anniversary, so congrats. Apple has also had a podcast studio up and running for the last few years, and I'm sure there'll be a ton of shows coming straight from the show. If I can find the list anywhere, I'll absolutely share it. Now, quick shout out to Molecule for making videos like this possible. I've been using mine for months now, ever since my nerdy friends in Silicon Valley showed me the results they were getting even and especially during the wildfires, and I couldn't believe how well it worked for them. That's because Molecule has technology that's capable of destroying air pollutants at the molecular level. Its technology has been verified by science, but more importantly, it's been tested by real people in the real world, and that's what makes it compelling. Molecule helped allergy and asthma sufferers around the country better cope with their conditions and significantly reduce their symptoms. To get yours, go to molecule.com, that's MOLEKULE.com, and enter Vector at checkout to save $75. Thanks, Molecule, and thanks to all of you for supporting the show. Okay, I'm gonna end this one just like I ended the last one. I'm sure I included a ton of people here that you already knew all about, some that you already rage all about, but hopefully others that are new and fresh and interesting to you to follow, especially as we head straight into WWDC 2019. But I'm equally sure I missed a bunch of the best, or at least some of your favorite top follows. So since I'm also looking for new, interesting, fresh people to follow, do me a solid and hit like, hit subscribe, and then jump into the comments and drop their show or their social. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next video.